If there was any series of games that I would consider to be a classic Nintendo franchise, Star Fox would definitely be one. Its simple approach as an arcade-style rail shooter is the quintessential essence of what most video games strive to be. An action-packed experience that can be replayed over and over again, a wide variety of power-ups and flashy boss fights, an engrossing story that's relatively straightforward. It's one of the many reasons why Star Fox received critical acclaim upon its inception. The first game in the series was released in 1993 on the Super NES. You play the game as Fox McCloud, the leader of an elite mercenary team known as Star Fox. After being banished from Corneria, Andross unleashed his massive army across the Lylat system, and in a last-ditch effort to stop him, the Cornerian army hired the Star Fox team to launch a counterattack on the planet Venom. The goal of the game is to make your way to the end of each level by shooting down the enemy forces and navigating the terrain. You can tilt the R-Wing sideways in order to pass through tight gaps, and you can also boost or brake to avoid incoming obstacles. These are all vital skills to navigation, because constantly colliding against objects will eventually break off your wings and limit your firepower. You can also perform a barrel roll, an important defensive option that reflects incoming lasers and tosses off enemies that attach to the ship. Nova Bombs are the most common power-up, but you can also pick up laser upgrades, wing repairs, power shields, energy supplies, and the occasional 1-up. While you're fighting enemies, Fox's teammates will also appear alongside you during some parts of the level, and by helping them, they'll give you some support by shooting down some of the on-screen enemies. In order to make your way to Venom, you can choose between one of 3 different paths, with each one varying in difficulty. Since each path has an entirely different set of levels to play through, this lends the game to having a ton of replay value. Star Fox is also famously known for being the first Nintendo game to feature polygonal graphics by using the power of the Super FX computer chip inside of the game cartridge. While it was considered cutting-edge technology during the time, nowadays it's not very good. The main issue is that the Super FX computer chip is basically like some bootleg shit that's assisting the CPU of the Super NES, so the game has a very inconsistent frame rate. As the hardware renders more polygons on screen, the frame rate starts to dip to the single digits and feels incredibly clunky to play, especially since you're controlling the game with a fucking D-pad. Still, despite that, the original Star Fox established everything that made the series good. It's a quick, arcade-style rail shooter with a ton of incentive for replayability. Shortly after Star Fox was released, development for Star Fox 2 was immediately put into the works. This game was planned to be a sequel that used the same rendering techniques as the previous game, but it was famously cancelled in 1995. Now, I usually don't cover a lot of the behind-the-scenes development for these retrospectives because I like to focus more on the fan perspective, but Star Fox 2 is an anomaly for most unreleased projects. Despite not being released, Star Fox 2 was actually 100% completed. The only reason Nintendo canceled the release was because of the next generation of hardware creating higher standards for 3D games. In order to avoid comparisons to the PlayStation and Sega Saturn consoles, Nintendo decided to hold the game back and focus their efforts on a remake for the Nintendo 64 that would combine the elements of the 2 previous games, that game ultimately becoming Star Fox 64. Unused elements of Star Fox 2 were also reworked into other titles, and in 2017, Nintendo finally released Star Fox 2 exclusively for the Super NES Classic. Remember that thing? Yeah, it's that thing that everyone collectively lost their minds over for months, played for like a week, and then immediately got bored of and threw in their closets, collecting dust, never to be seen again. Well, luckily, before all these things sold out, I was able to pick one up and experience this lost piece of history for the very first time. One of the most surprising things about Star Fox 2 was discovering how many things were carried over to Star Fox 64. Star Fox 2 featured all-range mode, it featured the Starwolf team as an antagonist, and it even had a ground-based walker transformation that's similar to the Landmaster. The major difference between Star Fox 2 and the original is that this game features a pseudo-real-time strategy element while you're selecting levels. As the player moves, enemies and missiles will also move towards Corneria at the same time, and the player has to intercept these threats while also taking control over enemy bases located on each planet. Fighting off these enemy threats takes place in all-range mode, allowing the player to freely move around in a closed-off arena in order to dogfight other enemy pilots. This change is essentially one of the main reasons why it performs much better than the original. Fighting enemies in an open space drastically lowers the amount of polygons being rendered on screen, which helps to maintain a consistent frame rate. The game still lags a bit inside of enemy bases, but since you can freely move around in the walker, colliding with the geometry is no longer an issue, which was one of the major problems with the frame rate in the previous game. Other gameplay features include holding the fire button to release charged laser shots, and the ability to play as multiple team members of Star Fox. You can pick from the original team of Fox, Falco, Peppy, and Slippy, as well as 2 new members of Star Fox, Miyu and Faye. Not much is known about these characters, but according to the Star Fox 2 manual, Miyu is described as a tomboyish lynx, while Faye is described as a girly dog from an aristocratic family. While the game abandons the branching paths from the first game, it does include different difficulty settings that changes the layout of the levels, ultimately serving a similar purpose. Star Fox 2 is aged just as well as the original, but it's surprising how most of these small changes have improved the overall experience. The game performs much better than the original, and the switch to fighting in all range mode drastically reduced the issues that came with rendering too many polygons. It's not the best Star Fox game ever made, but I have a lot of respect for it. The changes that came with this game were clearly made to address the clunky performance of the Super NES, which is admirable. Who knows? Without Star Fox 2 addressing these issues, some of these new gameplay mechanics may have never been included into later entries in the series. Anyways, that's the end of our little look behind the scenes. As far as fans were concerned during the time, Star Fox 2 was cancelled in 1995 and never saw the light of day. It was up to Star Fox 64 to become the true sequel to the original, and by using both games as a template, it's no surprise that Star Fox 64 became one of the best Star Fox games of all time. Released in 1997 on the Nintendo 64, the days of using the Super FX computer chip to accelerate dated hardware were officially over. Star Fox 64 was the pinnacle moment where the technology could flawlessly pull off what the original development team envisioned. To put it simply, the advancements between the first 2 games were enormous, and with this game being a complete reboot, you can take that first game and throw it in the fucking garbage! Star Fox 64 has a smooth frame rate, it graphically looks amazing compared to the original, it has better bosses, more levels, the first inclusion of all range mode, more technical R-wing maneuvers such as the somersault and the U-turn, charged homing laser shots, the addition of the Landmaster and the Blue Marine, the Star Wolf team, a revamped backstory for the Star Fox team, fully voice-acted characters, multiple shortcuts and branching paths. Like, this game had fucking everything! Being a reboot, the story is incredibly similar to the first game, but with some new additions. 5 years prior, the Star Fox team was comprised of Fox's father, James McCloud, Peppy Hare, and Pigma Dengar. After investigating some suspicious activity on the planet Venom, Pigma betrayed the team and killed James McCloud, with Peppy barely escaping. A few years later, Andross began his invasion of the Lylat system, and General Pepper now tasked a new Star Fox team headed by James's son to save Corneria. A lot of these changes are pretty minor, but they've been used to great effect. First off, the backstory of James McCloud helped to set up some needed stakes between the Star Fox team and Andross. In Star Fox 64, the team aren't just doing a job to get paid. There's some history and bad blood between both sides that makes the confrontations much more interesting. The team's backstory also props up Peppy as a seasoned veteran that holds the team together, while also setting up Starwolf to act as proper antagonists on par with Andross. The new addition of voice acting also helps to accentuate the personalities of all the characters. Falco is aggressive and short-tempered, Peppy is gentle and knowledgeable, and Slippy is a bit of a rookie and somewhat unsure of himself. In the previous game, you'd most likely have to read the manual to figure this all out, but in Star Fox 64, these characteristics are all properly presented and leave an everlasting impression. Even some of the side characters such as Cat Monroe or Bill Gray have become long-loved characters, despite only appearing in a couple of levels. The incentives to help your fellow teammates have also been greatly improved. Throughout the game, Falco will help you discover alternate routes, Peppy will give you general advice and tips to destroying bosses, Slippy will scan enemies and display their health on screen, and when your teammates retire from battle, they'll no longer provide these functions. These small interactions can be pretty minor at times, but they can have drastic effects on your playthrough, resulting in the player fighting different bosses or even playing through entirely different levels. Discovering alternate routes to Venom is easily the greatest addition to Star Fox 64. Instead of simply choosing between 3 predetermined paths, your path is now determined by completing certain objectives. This can be as simple as hitting a couple of switches, doing something within a certain time limit, or by finding a hidden warp that will take you to an entirely new planet. While there's still 3 paths that branch in difficulty, you can cross between each of the 3 paths depending on your performance, resulting in 25 unique routes. This is easily the best gameplay mechanic that has ever existed in the Star Fox series. It increases the replayability tenfold, it makes each level feel unique, and it creates an incentive to complete objectives that players could easily ignore. The game also has a decently fun multiplayer mode where you can dogfight with your friends. You could even unlock the ability to use the Landmaster, as well as playing as a Star Fox pilot with a bazooka, despite the fact that they're both far inferior and you'll most likely lose. Now, those are all great improvements and all, but listen, that's all bullshit. You see, the best thing about Star Fox 64 is that this is the first Nintendo game that used the Rumble Pack. What? What? Rumble Pack? Yeah, that's right! Rumble Pack, baby!
This is the Rumble Pack. The big reason why Star Fox 64 is the coolest cinematic gaming experience there is.
Now, I know what all the dumb kids are thinking right now. Like, holy frick, the Rumble Pack, what the H is that? Well, you see, the Rumble Pack is an accessory that you'd put into your Nintendo 64 controller, and then when you got hit while you're playing the game, the controller would rumble. Oh my god! Man, I was playing Star Fox 64 and I got hit by a shot and the controller was like, holy shit, the fucking immersion!
Wait a second. You're telling me that this Rumble Pack actually lets players feel the game?
What, like you're actually in the cockpit, flying and fighting?
That's impossible.
Listen, kids these days, they're playing their Xbox, they're playing their PlayStation, their controllers are all rumbling, they're putting the controller on their dicks because it feels good. Alright, rumble technology ain't that special nowadays. But man, back in the day, your controllers didn't do that shit. The Rumble Pack! You had to fucking be there, man. Kids these days don't fucking know. Anyways, Rumble Packs aside, Star Fox 64 is the fucking hypest shit. It's easily the best Star Fox game ever made, and debatably, one of the best games ever. So now it's 2002. Everyone loves Star Fox 64, it was one of the best games ever made, Nintendo has released the GameCube, and now everyone's just stoked for a next generation Star Fox game. Everyone is losing their minds. I mean, this next Star Fox game is going to look amazing, it's gonna have like 25 planets and tons of branching paths, maybe even some new vehicles or brand new Star Fox members. I mean, the last game perfected the formula, and this next game is going to be a slam dunk. So now Nintendo's just like, hey, you know that Star Fox game that we just made that everyone loved? You know what? Fuck that. Fuck that shit. You know what Star Fox really needs? Melee combat with fucking dinosaurs. It's like, what? No! What the fuck are you doing? And then Nintendo's like, no, it's fine. You see, Fox is in the game, so it's a brand new Star Fox game. It's like, fuck you. Fuck off. Star Fox Adventures is a Star Fox spin-off game that no one wanted. This game was originally planned to be a game called Dinosaur Planet that was developed by Rare, but then Miyamoto turned it into a Star Fox game at the last second so it would make more money. It's basically a D-tier Zelda clone with some Star Fox elements just half-assed thrown in. The game's story has a lot of plot holes, the combat is overall pretty mediocre, and everything revolving around Star Fox fucking sucks in this game. The story takes place 8 years after the ending of Star Fox 64, and Fox has to stop Dinosaur Planet from exploding because it would affect the entire Lylat system. So then he has to spend like 99% of the game running around with the dumb staff and doing a bunch of shitty Zelda things until it's revealed in the last 5 seconds of the game that Andross is causing the planet to explode for some reason. Also, this is the game that Crystal was from. You spend like 5 minutes playing as her in the prologue, and then she gets trapped in a crystal and does fuck all, and then Fox shows up and jerks off to her, and that's fucking it. Also, since the planet is going to explode, it caused some chunks of the planet to be ripped off from the surface, which creates the flimsiest excuse for Fox to use his R-Wing. All you do is collect a certain amount of gold rings in order to land on the ground. They're all terrible levels, they last like a minute max, there's no incentive to do anything besides collecting the gold rings, there's no boss fights in any of these sections besides an incredibly forced-in final boss fight against Andross, and overall, everything about this game fucking sucks. Now, you can say that you played the game and it wasn't that bad, but don't tell me that you wanted it. Alright, after playing Star Fox 64, no one was like, oh yeah, for the sequel to this science fiction game, I hope Fox fights dinosaurs on the ground in prehistoric times, the fucking staff doing a bunch of shitty Zelda puzzles, and then they should add in a sexy female fox who rides a goddamn pterodactyl goes, Akusune Duste Du, Akino Kukineken! Like, shut the fuck up. No one asked for this shit. No one wanted it. The really annoying thing with Star Fox Adventures is that it's obviously some stupid spin-off bullshit, but it's actually considered the next Star Fox game. Like, I don't even want to talk about this game. I made this video because I want to talk about Star Fox, except now I can't do that because Nintendo slapped the Star Fox branding onto this piece of shit and said it's a Star Fox game, even though it isn't. And it's like, fuck you, that's not a Star Fox game. Except now it is because Nintendo says it is, so now I have to talk about it. It's so fucking frustrating. So now it's 2005. Star Fox Adventures was kind of a misstep. It's not a game that anyone wanted, but whatever, it's fine. It was clearly just a spin-off that had some Star Fox elements retroactively thrown in, and eventually we'll get the true sequel to Star Fox 64 that we've all been waiting for. Well, in the meantime, Star Fox Assault came out. This game was developed by Namco, and the same development team who worked on the Ace Combat series. Star Fox Assault is widely considered to be one of the good Star Fox games, but honestly, I think it's kind of mediocre. The story takes place 1 year after Star Fox Adventures, with Crystal as a brand new member of Star Fox. With Andross being defeated, the main enemy threat for this game is the Aporoids, which are basically like a parasitic insect-like race. The game features a couple of levels that have the classic scrolling corridor sections that Star Fox is known for, but then a majority of the game is spent running around on the ground with guns. You have the option to board R-Wings and Landmasters whenever you need them, but most of the time it's hardly required and rarely matches the same style of gameplay as Star Fox 64. Most of the game takes place in these all-range mode style arenas, almost akin to playing a multiplayer match. Overall, the main campaign is incredibly underwhelming. It features 10 missions that must be completed in sequential order. It has no branching paths or alternate routes. You can complete the entire campaign within only a couple of hours, and once you complete it, it's not worth revisiting. One of the major problems with Star Fox Assault is that the main campaign is littered with cutscenes and expository dialogue, which feels incredibly out of place when compared to the simplicity of Star Fox 64. The best thing about Star Fox 64 was that it was paced incredibly well. It sets up a prologue and gives context to the overall main objective, but while you're playing the game, the minor-based objectives on each planet are quick and to the point.
Recover our base from the enemy army.
Roger, General.
Good luck.
Meanwhile, Star Fox Assault meanders on and on about the goal of each mission and the enemy threats and why you're doing this and what you have to get, and it's all at the service of a story that's only vaguely interesting. Now, that's not to say that Star Fox 64's story had an incredible amount of depth or anything, but it achieves a lot more with way less effort. Anything remotely interesting was told directly to the player through radio chatter, and twists and turns throughout the narrative all occurred during the missions while you were playing the game. The best thing about Star Fox 64 was that the cutscenes were kept to a minimum, because replayability was one of the most important aspects of the series. That's why I don't find a lot of value with the main campaign of Star Fox Assault. The story is enjoyable on a first-time playthrough, but it robs the game of its pacing, removes the branching paths for the sake of having a coherent story, and ends up killing the replayable nature that Star Fox is known for. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't hate Star Fox Assault or think that it betrayed the roots of the series or anything. I just think that Namco had misplaced priorities. I have almost no proof to back up these claims, but it feels like the developers really loved the multiplayer aspect of Star Fox 64 and designed the core mechanics of Star Fox Assault to cater to that. Giving pilots the ability to board vehicles and equipping them with a wide variety of weapons feels like something that would be first inspired for a versus mode. In fact, the game only has 3 R-Wing based corridor missions, 1 R-Wing based all-range mode mission, and 6 ground-based missions that involve boarding vehicles. It gives me the impression that most of the campaign was designed in such a way that the levels could be retrofitted into maps for the multiplayer. Honestly, it feels like Namco didn't care about the classic Star Fox experience. To be fair, I remember playing the multiplayer with friends and having a fun time with it when it was released, but nowadays, the game has almost nothing to offer. Overall, Star Fox Assault was just a minor distraction. It wasn't as offensive as Star Fox Adventures, but it definitely wasn't the true sequel to Star Fox 64 that we've all been waiting for. So now it's 2006. Star Fox Assault was released about a year ago, and Nintendo followed it up with Star Fox Command on the Nintendo DS. Honestly, I don't even remember this shit. This game was developed by Q Games and directed by Dylan Cuthbert, which is the same guy who worked at Argonaut Software and helped program the original Star Fox games on the Super NES. The development team took inspiration from the cancelled Star Fox 2 and reworked in a similar style of pseudo real-time strategy, hence the name Star Fox Command. Much like Star Fox 2, each battle in the game has its own enemy layout, and the main objective is for the player to eliminate the enemy forces. Players start their turn by drawing on the touchscreen to create a flight path, and then both armies move during the same turn. A major change to this game is that you can now control multiple units at once, as well as using missiles from the Great Fox to destroy enemy units. Intercepting enemy ships will take you into an all-range mode encounter, where you have to control the R-Wing with the DS stylus in order to defeat the enemy forces within the given time limit. Because of these changes, Star Fox Command now has 14 different playable characters, each with their own unique R-Wing that features different stats and equipment. The story for Star Fox Command takes place after Star Fox Assault. This time around, the Lylat system is being attacked by the Anglar Empire, an aquatic race that lives within the toxic seas of Venom. With Star Fox being disbanded, the game starts with Fox attempting to defeat the Anglar Empire on his own. Throughout the game, you can make certain choices to gather up missing members of the team, which affects the route you take on your playthrough and results in one of 9 endings. Overall, the main incentive for replaying the game is discovering all the routes and seeing all the endings, which is a major problem because this game's story is just god-awful. To put it simply, Star Fox Command plays out like Sonic fanfiction. For whatever reason, the game seems to be really obsessed with shipping and pairing up new characters and having children, which comes across as something you'd see written online by some 14-year-old. It also doesn't help that a lot of the new characters tend to be relatives or love interests of prior characters in the series. The new characters in the game are Lucy Hare, who's the daughter of Peppy, Amanda Toad, who is Slippy's fiance, and Dash Bowman, who is Andross's grandson. And that's not even including new characters that are introduced in the alternate endings. Another issue with Star Fox Command is that the game places a ton of weight around the relationship between Fox and Crystal, which ends up coming across as really trashy fan service. The prologue starts off explaining that they fell in love, but eventually Fox kicked Crystal off the team to protect her from being killed. Leaving Star Fox heartbroken, Crystal ended up joining the Starwolf team instead, because I guess Panther Caroso was nice to her in Star Fox Assault, despite the fact that everyone else in Starwolf are basically a bunch of assholes. It's just the stupidest fucking setup for a story I've ever seen, especially since Star Fox Assault already happened and everything was fine. Fox and Crystal clearly liked each other in that game. Crystal was flying around in the heat of battle and Fox didn't give a shit, so like, why did this suddenly become an issue? It just comes across as characters being irrational for the sake of having conflict in the story. It also doesn't help that the game sets up this weird love triangle between Fox, Crystal, and Panther Caroso. So it's this very bizarre plot contrivance because Panther Caroso is basically a cool black guy that Crystal never really cared about, but now all of a sudden, Crystal is basically using Panther Caroso to make Fox jealous. So basically, the main plot of Star Fox Command is that Fox is getting cucked by a black guy. I mean, I'm not against it or anything, but like, why is this in a Star Fox game? Like, I just want to fly around and shoot down ships, but now I'm balls deep into this plot about Fox getting cucked. It's literally the main incentive to replay the game. Like, apparently I'm supposed to just be sitting here playing this fucking game just like, oh man, I wonder if Fox gets cucked in this ending. Like, it's fucking bizarre. Another issue with the game is that all 9 endings are considered to be non-canon, mostly because they all conflict with each other depending on the choices you make. The default ending has Star Fox defeating the Anglar Empire, with Crystal having rejoined the team. However, a couple of months later, Crystal decides to leave Star Fox and rejoin Star Wolf, leaving Fox to wander the world alone and unloved. Like, Jesus Christ, that's the default ending? Are you fucking kidding me? Now, don't worry though, because some of the other endings are even worse. There's another ending where Dash Bowman rebuilds life on the planet Venom, but then becomes the leader of an all-powerful empire and becomes consumed with power, ultimately becoming evil like his grandfather and waging another war against Corneria, which I guess was kinda predictable. There's another ending where Starwolf ends up defeating the Anglar Empire instead, with Crystal as a member. Starwolf are praised for their courage, but Crystal is shunned as a traitor for abandoning Star Fox, resulting in Crystal fleeing to a distant galaxy, changing her name to Cursed, and becoming a bounty hunter. She later runs into Fox during one of her jobs and is unrecognized. Like, what the fuck is up with this shitty deviant art? Why is this ending so fucking depressing, yet so embarrassing at the same time? Like, I didn't even know that was possible. There's another ending where Falco shows up late to the final battle and becomes ostracized from the team's success, later abandoning Star Fox out of rage and creating Star Falco alongside Cat Monroe and Dash Bowman. Like, come on! Star Falco? Really? Now, all of that is bullshit because this next ending is fucking god tier. There's an ending where Crystal stays with Starwolf, stops the Anglar Empire, and Fox becomes depressed having everything taken away from him, later pairing up with Falco and retrofitting their R-Wings to become racers in the G0 Grand Prix. Like, what the fuck is this shit? Is this game for fucking real? Now, some of the other endings turn out a bit better, but they're way more boring. One ending has Crystal rejoining the team and everything turns out fine. There's another ending where Crystal rejoins the team alongside Slippy's fiance, with Dash Bowman rebuilding life on the planet Venom. There's another ending where Slippy just fucks off with Amanda and has a bunch of kids. And then there's a happy ending where Star Fox is disbanded, with Fox and Crystal living happily ever after and raising a son named Marcus, who later goes on to form his own squadron comprised of Slippy's son, Peppy's granddaughter, and Falco as a seasoned veteran, which is by far the most fanfiction-y, Boruto-ass ending I've ever seen. Luckily, since all these endings are non-canon, Star Fox Command can basically be written off as the fanfiction garbage it is. It's an embarrassing game that deserves to be forgotten. I mean, like, what the fuck was Nintendo even doing at this point? When I want to play a Star Fox game, I don't want to fight dinosaurs in a shitty Zelda ripoff, I don't want to run around on the ground and shoot guns in a multiplayer-inspired linear campaign, and I definitely don't want to play a pseudo-real-time strategy game with limited all-range mode combat with a story featuring shitty officialized fanfiction. I just want to play Star Fox 64 again with some new levels. That's all they have to fucking do. Maybe they can add in one new character, maybe do something unique on a couple of planets, switch up the story a bit, maybe add in a new vehicle or something, but like, that's fucking it. That's all anyone wants. Just make a sequel to a game that people like. What the fuck is Nintendo doing? So now Nintendo's like, you want Star Fox 64 again? Well, here you go. And it's like, you know what? At this point, I'll fucking take it. Star Fox 64 3D was released in 2011 for the Nintendo 3DS, and it's a really good Star Fox game because it's just Star Fox 64 again. Now, I usually don't cover games that get remade and ported to other systems, but Star Fox 64 3D is an anomaly for most remade ports. First of all, it's an acknowledgement that Nintendo knows that Star Fox 64 is the best game in the series, despite the fact that they haven't even attempted to make a proper sequel. It also showcased that only 5 Star Fox games have been released since its inception, spanning about 18 years since the first game was released. It's also important to note that after the release of Star Fox 64, Nintendo have never led the development for any of these projects. At this point, Miyamoto has basically just been cutting the checks and telling other people to supervise the projects, like Nintendo doesn't even give a fuck. I mean, don't get me wrong, I appreciate that they decided to remake this game for the 3DS, but the whole situation revolving around this series just fucking sucks. All Nintendo has to do is actually put in some effort to make a proper Star Fox game, and they just refuse to do it. It's so frustrating. Anyways, I don't know if Star Fox 64 3D sold well or something, but it seemed like Nintendo finally got off their asses and actually did something. At E3 2014, Nintendo revealed that they were working on a brand new Star Fox game for the Wii U. Miyamoto was deep in working on the project, Nintendo was handling the main development for the game, they brought on Platinum Games to do some of the grunt work. I fucking love Platinum Games, they made some of the best games ever. Nintendo set the wheels in motion to putting out a fucking next-gen HD banger Star Fox game. They released Star Fox Zero in 2016, and it fucking sucks! It's awful! They were so close! They were so close to putting out something that was good. But as always, Shigeru Innovation Miyamoto had to sabotage the whole fucking project with a bunch of stupid gimmicks no one asked for. In Star Fox Zero, you have the normal third-person view on the TV that you use to navigate the R-Wing, but you also have a first-person view on the Wii U tablet that you can use to shoot down enemies. The main gimmick for Star Fox Zero is that you can use the motion controls to move the aiming reticle without moving the R-Wing, which drastically increases the firing range of your lasers. Overall, it's a really useful technique to master, but using the game tablet to its fullest potential often involves moving the controller at absurd angles and constantly shifting your attention away from the TV. Now, I know what you're thinking. That all sounds fine and dandy, but what if I just want to play the normal way and disable the motion controls? Well, Miyamoto says fuck you because you don't have the option. Shigeru Innovation Miyamoto included so many gimmicks revolving around the Wii U tablet that it's impossible to play this game normally. Wow! No accessibility options for handicapped people? How innovative! Shigeru Innovation Miyamoto's doing the fucking hokey pokey with Gazoo shoved up his ass. He's just like, now, you know what'd be great? Let's add in this stupid gyrocopter that flies like 5 miles an hour and attach some dipshit robot to it. But Shigeru Innovation Miyamoto, isn't that just a dumb novelty that loses its charm on multiple playthroughs, eventually becoming a total pace annihilator that completely kills the momentum of the entire game? Well, don't worry, Miyamoto says. You can see the perspective of the robot on the Wii U gamepad while you're flying the gyrocopter on the TV. Isn't that amazing? And it's like, no, it isn't, you fucking idiot. How about you just make a Star Fox game without fucking everything up? Why'd you have to add in the walker mode from Star Fox 2 and add in a bunch of ground-based missions? Why does the game constantly lock the camera in all range mode? Why do so many boss fights require you to control the Landmaster in 3D? Why is so much time spent ignoring the scrolling corridor sections that Star Fox is known for? Why can't you guys just make a proper sequel? And then Miyamoto's like, no, we don't want your money. We have to continue innovation despite the fact that no one asked for it. All right, I don't care if my stupid gimmicks ruin the entire game. I don't care if I bastardize the entire fucking series. And honestly, I don't even care if the game is fun. All that matters is that each game is drastically different. If it's different, then that means it's good. All right, you're gonna fucking sit there and play my goddamn Star Fox game the way I want you to play it, because this new control scheme is cutting edge innovation. No one bought it. No one bought it. Now Shigeru Innovation Miyamoto gets to put his hands on his fucking hips and say, well, I guess no one likes Star Fox anymore because we intentionally fucked up the series for no reason. So now we'll never make another Star Fox game for the next 10 years because no one bought it. And it's like, fuck off. How about you guys just make a proper sequel to Star Fox 64? How hard is that? It's like you've done it before, you clearly have the resources to do it, you know how to make it, you have the template to make something good, and you just won't do it. I mean, how long can this go on? How long can Nintendo continue to do this? It's been 22 years since Star Fox 64 was released. 22 fucking years. That's like 90% of my entire life. There are kids these days that don't remember 9/11 and have HD Rumble. How the fuck is this possible? Also, Star Fox Guard fucking sucks. It's just some puzzle game where you look through the cameras and protect a shitty base by killing robots. It's not a Star Fox game. It's fucking boring. Throw that goddamn game in the trash. Moving on. So, as you can see, being a longtime fan of Star Fox is incredibly frustrating. It's like the original Star Fox games are so elegant in their simplicity. All you do is fly through a corridor-style scrolling level, you shoot down some enemies, you fight a boss, you go from planet to planet traveling towards Venom, sometimes you shoot down some enemies in all-range mode, and then you fight the final boss and beat the game within a couple hours. That's all Star Fox is, and Nintendo just doesn't want it to be that. Now, I know I've been shitting on Miyamoto for a bit, but don't get me wrong. I think he's done some amazing work in the video game industry. If Miyamoto wasn't constantly pushing the envelope, we might have never played some of the greatest games of all time. Innovation isn't necessarily a bad thing. After all, if Nintendo never attempted to innovate the early 3D Zelda games, the series might have started to become extremely stale and Breath of the Wild would have never existed. At the proper time, innovation can create some of the greatest games of all time, but when used improperly, it can hinder the natural progression of a series and cause things to go awry. The biggest problem with Star Fox is that it was never given the opportunity to see things through to its logical conclusion. It's like Nintendo have been constantly trying to introduce new gameplay mechanics to keep players interested, but all it's done is driven away the entire fan base by not giving them what they came for. I mean, imagine if Star Fox was treated just as well as The Legend of Zelda. Imagine that Nintendo released 4 more sequels that were just as faithful to the series, but also add in a couple of new things that kept things interesting. What if Star Fox 3 was just as good, but had a much darker tone and some interesting time travel mechanics? Maybe Star Fox 4 was way more cartoony and more lighthearted. Maybe Star Fox 5 was a bit of a retread of the original, but still pretty solid. And then imagine that Star Fox 6 was, well, Star Fox Zero. Imagine if Star Fox Zero was the 6th game in a series that was all inspired by the original. I mean, it still has branching paths and some interesting boss fights, but the motion controls are incredibly frustrating, and most of the time was spent ignoring the classic corridor-style levels that the series was known for, instead opting in for vehicle transformations that shift the focus more towards ground-based missions. Overall, it would still be similar to those 5 previous games, but it would have started to lose its identity for what Star Fox originally was. Now, just sit there for a while and think about that. Imagine that alternate timeline where Star Fox was crushing it for 20 years straight, and then after all that time, Shigeru, Innovation Miyamoto, came in at the perfect moment and said, hey, Star Fox Zero felt a little out of touch, so let's take some time to reflect on what made this series great, and then let's use that knowledge to inspire the sequel for our next game. Can you imagine what that next Star Fox game would be? What would that next Star Fox game become in this alternate timeline? Well, the answer is that we'll never find out, because the Star Fox series hasn't progressed at all. In our current reality, all anyone wants right now is a sequel to a 22-year-old Nintendo 64 game. I mean, I'm still a bit hopeful that Nintendo will be able to turn things around, but man, Star Fox is definitely entering the Paper Mario territory of just being completely hopeless. Now, if Nintendo wants to make a good Star Fox game, they could do one of 2 things. They could either release some groundbreaking next-gen Star Fox experience that reestablishes the series with some new gameplay mechanics, or they could release a retro-styled sequel to Star Fox 64 and continue from there. Now, for me personally, I have all bets placed on the latter. The best thing about Nintendo making a more retro-inspired Star Fox game is that it would take a lot less resources to develop and be much more obtainable. I would love for Nintendo to prove me wrong with some groundbreaking next-gen experience, but honestly, I have no faith. They've proven time and time again that they just don't know what they're doing, so just go make Sonic Mania for Star Fox. Just call it Star Fox Mania. I don't even give a shit. All Nintendo has to do is make 15 brand new Star Fox levels, create a similar overworld map to the original with branching paths, make a brand new story, and then release it as a download title for like $30, and I'd be fucking stoked. Better yet, if Nintendo wanted to go all out and make a $60 high-budget game, they could just make like double the levels and make the overworld map bigger. Like, that's how low my standards are at this point. That's all they have to fucking do. Even if you could beat the game within a couple of hours, I would still buy it because it would have infinite replay value. Well, whatever ends up happening in the future, I'll always have my copy of Star Fox 64. Despite how bad the series gets, I can always pop in the cartridge and fight my way to Venom alongside my team of furry friends. After all this time, it's still just as good as it's ever been. I just wish that maybe there could be a sequel. Also, for the next game, keep Miyamoto away from it. He's clearly upset that no one likes Pikmin as much as he does, so now he has to sabotage every other project he's working on with his goddamn innovation. I mean, why'd you have to add in all this dumb shit, Miyamoto? Why'd you ruin Paper Mario? Where the fuck is F-Zero? I've been waiting longer than Half-Life 3 for all this shit!